Tony, what do you think? Should we? Okay, great. Welcome, everybody. We'll commence our study session on SB9 and related issues. I know we have, was it 5 council members on Zoom? Why don't we go through roll first and then we'll figure out. Great.
Cohen,
Here.
Orozco,
Here.
Davis, Esparza,
Here.
Arenas, Foley,
Here.
Mahan,
That's what I
and
said.
Jimenez just walked in. Jones, Licardo.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Okay. Welcome, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome. I'm sorry, I said SB9. I meant SB9 and 10. We don't want to leave that one out. I want to thank all of our planning and city manager staff who worked so hard on trying to catch up with what is a very fast changing landscape. And I think we don't have yet all the facts because there's still stuff to be determined, but we're going to at least get a handle on what we know. So with that, Jennifer?
I'm going to turn the presentation over to Chris Burton, our Planning, Building, and Code Enforcement Director.
Thank you, Jennifer. Mayor and Council, Chris Burton, Director of Planning, Building, Code Enforcement. And I'm joined today by Michael Brio, our Deputy Director for Citywide Planning, and Martina Davis, our Acting Division Manager for Citywide Planning as well. I believe we're also joined on the Zoom by Tara Shafi with the City Attorney's Office, who's also been helping us dissect some of this important information. So as you're aware, staff has been exploring the addition of housing capacity to the 94% of our residentially designated lands, which are allowed for single-family residences, through the direction from council and through the 4-year general plan review process. The opportunity housing work has had us look at a broad spectrum of these issues, but clearly with the state passing SB 9 and 10, our work has come into focus in a different way. So in addition to, sorry, let me just get us to the right place in our presentation. In addition to the info memo that we published the week before last, we'll be covering a whole series of information today, including a comparison of SB 9 with opportunity housing, some of the challenges we have around implementation of SB 9 in San Jose, information around SB 10 and what that means for our work in the future. And then we'll be available for questions from council and to listen to additional testimony from the public. I will just note, before we dive into the specifics of the information, a lot of this is new. We're certainly working as fast as we can to understand all of the different facets of these bills, understand the implications to our work on a regular basis. But that may change, and so we'll continue to keep you updated and informed as we learn more. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Martina to walk through our presentation.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. My name is Martina Davis. I'm the Acting Division Manager for Citywide Planning. First, I'm going to give you just a high-level overview of what Senate Bill 9 does, and then I'll be delving into the details of these items on this overview. So first thing is it applies to all cities, including charter cities like San Jose. It also applies to counties that include an urbanized area, so Santa Clara County will also be implementing SB 9. It applies to all properties that are zoned single family. So in San Jose, that means properties that are zoned R1 or planned development districts that allow single family uses. I'll note that planned development districts also often are areas with homeowners associations, and there is no provisions in SB 9 that would supersede a homeowners association from implementing and enforcing their own standards. So if there are CCNRs that would conflict with SB 9, those are not overwritten. Like for ADUs, there is legislation that invalidates CCNRs that would prevent ADUs, accessory dwelling units. SB 9 does exempt properties that meet certain criteria that I'll be going through later. The core of SB 9 is it allows subdivision of any one lot into 2 lots. It also allows construction of up to 2 units on each lot. SB 9 includes a number of mandatory development standards that I'll be covering, as well as it does allow cities to adopt their own standards with some limitations, and we'll be talking about that in a moment as well. It is effective January 1st, 2022, so we will be needing to start processing applications come January, which is coming quickly. So first I'm going to cover the urban lot splits. So what SB 9 allows and requires the city to approve is a lot split to allow one property to be subdivided into two roughly proportional properties. They define roughly proportional to mean that one lot may be no less than 40% of the size of the other. So just using this 10,000 square foot lot example, if you start with 10,000 square feet, the lowest lot size you could get to is 4,000 square feet for one lot, and then the other would be larger. No lot may be created that's less than 1,200 square feet, so that would mean you would need to start with at least a 2,400 square foot lot to be able to subdivide. I'll note that the average lot size of your kind of typical post-World War II San Jose single-family neighborhood is 6,000 square feet per lot, so 2,400 is significantly lower than most lots we have in San Jose that are zoned single-family. The city is not required to permit more than 2 units per lot for lots that have been subdivided under SB 9, but we would need to take action to apply that into our zoning ordinance that currently would allow someone to construct accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units regardless of an SB 9 subdivision. Couple more things about the urban lot splits. There's this interesting owner occupancy requirement. The applicant must submit an attestation that they plan to live in the property for at least 3 years after the date of subdivision. It's an interesting one because you notice it says they plan to live there. It doesn't actually require that they continue to live there. It just requires that they attest to us that they're planning to live there. So we will be looking into what we do around that, if there's any enforcement mechanisms. But that's an important kind of distinction. The same applicant cannot subdivide adjoining lots. I think this is to prevent a developer who owns a bunch of vacant property they've just subdivided to then come in and double the density of that subdivision while they all still own it. It does require a ministerial approval process. So an SB 9 subdivision would be processed through what's called a parcel map. It's something our Department of Public Works already does process. The main difference is that it would not, because it's ministerial, it would not have CEQA review for that parcel map. Parcel maps tend to be small subdivisions, so they tend to be CEQA exemptions, so that shouldn't be a huge difference in process. Finally, on subdivisions, the law does allow us to require access to a public right-of-way, so we do not have to allow subdivision of a landlocked parcel that has no access. We also may require easements for public services, so think utility easements where they're needed. And a main difference as well is that we may not require right-of-way dedication or construction of public improvements. So in a parcel map situation, most frequently what you would see is if someone wanted to subdivide a lot that didn't have a sidewalk built, they would be required to build the sidewalk as part of that subdivision. We would no longer be able to require that. Now I'm going to talk about the lands that are not subject to SB 9, even if they're zoned single family. These first two, protected farmlands and wetlands, are unlikely to occur, but of course we'll be checking. It also excludes lands within a very high fire hazard severity zone. That is something mapped by the state. I checked the maps, and San Jose has very little of this land, a little bit in our East Hills and a little bit on the west side of San Jose, but very, very little would be subject to this exclusion. Obviously, we don't want more housing on a hazardous waste site, so it would exclude hazardous waste sites. It does allow someone to build within an earthquake fault zone or a flood hazard zone only if the requirements for building within those zones are met. It also excludes lands protected for conservation, so for example, a conservation easement, as well as habitat for protected species. The biggest distinction is it does exclude lands within a historic district or in a site that is designated as historic. You may be aware on our historic resources inventory, we have a number of different levels of listing. So we are still working to confirm kind of what level this exclusion kicks in on. Is it city landmarks only? Does it include conservation areas? Right now, our working assumption is that it would exclude any property on the historic resources inventory, but that's something that we will be certainly revisiting and making sure we're consistent with our interpretation of that. The legislator was cognizant of, the potential unintended consequence of SB 9 projects displacing existing housing. So they did include a couple of provisions around that. One of them is that units created by SB 9 cannot be rented for terms of 30 days or less. So you can't use SB 9 to build Airbnb on your property, for example. And then projects under SB 9 cannot alter or demolish rent-controlled units, deed-restricted affordable units, or units where the Ellis Act has been exercised within the last 15 years to remove the unit from the rental market. We think those ones are less likely to come up because those protections don't kick in until you get multiple units on a property. But the one that would likely come up most frequently off of this list is that it also excludes properties that have been occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years. And when I say exclude, you could subdivide. If you're not touching that dwelling, you're fine, but you can't alter or demolish the dwelling that's been occupied by a tenant in the last 3 years. Okay, so I touched earlier that that SB 9 has some mandatory development standards. So the first one is that we cannot require more than 4-foot side or rear setbacks. For the side setback, currently we require 5 feet for most single-family zone areas, so that's a difference of 1 foot. And then the rear yard, currently we require 15 feet for 1 story and 20 feet for a 2-story in our R18 district, which is our most frequent. So that would be a substantial change there. We cannot require any setbacks for existing structures. And so we're reading that to mean that if somebody wanted to subdivide a property and put that new lot line right at the edge of their existing home, we would have to allow that. That's another area that we are looking for interpretation on because that kind of situation can be difficult from a building or fire code standpoint, so we'll be clarifying the intent of that provision. We must allow construction of attached units, so we would not be able to adopt a standard that says, yes, you can build an SB 9 project only if they are detached units. That's not permitted. As a note, attached units, the law specifies, must be designed to the standards required for selling individually. So no doors between the units. You can't kind of, as explained to me, game the system to create a large addition on your house and call it a new unit under SB 9 is kind of, we understand the intention of that one. Cities may apply objective development standards as long as the standards do not conflict with these mandatory standards and the standards don't prevent construction of at least 2 800 square foot units on each lot. A lot of times I get the question, what does objective mean? Objective, generally it means standards that involve no personal or subjective judgment and are verifiable, right, by an external reference. So for example, if you had a standard that said an SB 9 project must be compatible with the surrounding properties, that's not objective. What compatible means something different for me, you, anybody, and there's no external one reference we can all look at to say what compatible means. So generally objective standards have to be numeric based, no more than this many feet above the adjacent property. You can measure that and verify that, right? Another thing I'll note about this, and we'll be talking a little bit more about this later, is that Senate Bill 330 prohibits cities from adopting development standards that lessen the intensity on a lot in an existing zoning district. And so that would include things like applying additional setbacks or lower height restrictions. And right now there seems to be a lot of debate on how that applies to cities adopting their own SB 9 development standards. Our neighbor in Campbell shared with us that they have an ordinance going to their council for some SB 9 development standards, and they've already received pushback from advocates on whether or not adopting any SB 9 standards in essence is a downzoning under SB 330. So that's going to be a key issue that we will be seeking clarification on because it could very much limit the standards that we could adopt. So parking, we know everyone's interested in parking. SB 9 does specify that we cannot require more than 1 parking space per unit. It does have some exceptions to that. We cannot require any parking for projects that are within a half mile of high quality transit, corridors, or major transit stops. So that's bus lines with essentially service of at least every 15 minutes during commute hours, or a bus rapid transit or a rail stop or intersection of two major bus lines. ADUs would be able to continue to use current ADU parking exceptions. All right, magic question. How many units could someone build under SB 9? So SB 9 units could be a combination of single-family, duplexes, accessory dwellings, and junior accessory dwellings. So based on SB 9 plus our current accessory dwelling unit standards, someone would be able to do up to 5 units per lot. And we'll show you kind of what that looks like. And on a subdivided lot, they could do up to 10 units because it's 5 per lot. Now, as I mentioned before, SB 9 does not require a city to permit more than 2 units on a property created by an SB 9 subdivision. However, our accessory dwelling unit ordinance, which we have codified the state's accessory dwelling unit standards within our own ordinance, would continue to require that unless we do an update. And I do want to raise an alternative interpretation that's out there. We actually got this from a training from a law firm that was doing an SB 9 summary. Their reading of it is that we must allow 2 new units on a property regardless of what's already on the property. So under that interpretation, you could actually add 2 units to a property that already contains a single-family dwelling and accessory dwelling unit, so it kind of makes the number of units go very far up. We don't concur with this, but this is definitely an area that we're seeking clarification on. We think this is one where the state is really going to need to weigh in on, because there's a lot of people out there who kind of feel confident in their interpretations, and the interpretations are very, very different. So, picture is worth 1,000 words, so let's go through a couple examples of how many units you could get under SB 9. Before I delve through these, I want to note these are not to scale. They do not take into account making room for parking, staircases, anything like that. They're just to illustrate the potential number of units. So in this first scenario, we could have a property that already has a single-family dwelling, and if they wanted to max out under SB 9 with building another single-family dwelling, they could do so. So they could build a single-family dwelling in addition to the current one, and then they would be allowed to build 1 accessory dwelling unit and 1 junior accessory dwelling unit on the property as well. So any kind of configuration of an SB 9 project using 2 single-family houses is going to result in up to 4 units. My second example is if you wanted to do a duplex under SB 9 without subdividing, so these first 2 do not assume a subdivision. So you could construct a duplex, and then again, our local ADU ordinance, which is reflective of the state ADU law, would allow you to build 2 detached accessory dwelling units and then convert non-living space within that duplex to an attached accessory dwelling unit. And those, though, would have to come after, because those are only allowed on a property that already contains a multiple family dwelling. And again, this is something that we can amend our zoning ordinance to change. Or not, sorry, excuse me, not this one, because the 2 units is only for if you subdivide. So next example is if you have a subdivision. So this assumes we do make that update to the zoning ordinance I've been talking about, where we use that intent in that provision of SB 9 that says cities do not have to allow more than 2 units per lot. In this scenario, someone could do any combination of a single family, an accessory dwelling, or a duplex, but no accessory dwellings on the property, and it would result in a total of 4 units on this subdivided property. Okay, I'm going to show you the example of the max out. If we weren't to change our zoning ordinance, I do want to mention that we did some kind of preliminary calculations, and we don't think this is just physically achievable on your typical single-family lot. You just run out of space before you can fit this many units, period. So we are thinking this would be an edge case on a much larger lot just from simply what you can fit, but in theory, you could do a subdivision, a duplex, and then add those 3 ADUs onto the duplex. Because again, our local ADU ordinance still says if you have a duplex, you're allowed ADUs, and we would need to make a change to say unless it's an SB 9 subdivision. And this could result in up to 10 units. But again, typical lot size, we don't see this fitting. And I'll turn it over to Michael.
Martina, on that last
Yes.
just slide, just to real clarify, I'm sorry. where you have the ADUs laid out, I thought those were junior ADUs you would have within the structure.
So for multifamily dwellings are actually not allowed to have junior ADUs. It does allow a full ADU. I mean, there's not a huge distinction between them at this point, but it does allow an attached kind of full ADU. But again, it does restrict it to being conversion of existing non-living space.
Got it. Okay,
so like a
thank you.
garage.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, happy to clarify.
Okay, Michael Brio, Deputy Director, Citywide Planning. So I'm just going to quickly go over some differences and similarities between Opportunity Housing and SB 9. So I think as the council is well aware, every 4 years the city evaluates the general plan's progress towards achieving its goals. There is I think it's 42-member task force that worked with staff on developing recommendations. The council sets the scope, and one of the scoping items that was included in this process was directing the staff and the task force to explore opportunity housing as a transition between urban village, specifically transit-oriented urban villages and the surrounding residential neighborhoods, and also look at it as an opportunity on single-family properties that are adjacent to already medium-density housing types. So the task force process concluded, when was it? August 2020? I can't even remember. It's been a year or so. But anyway, the staff had a recommendation that really was in the sort of the sandbox that the council directed staff that we could play in. And so that recommendation is to allow opportunity housing within approximately half mile around transit-oriented urban villages and or parcels that share a property line with lands that allow multi-family development. And I think we did have a more developed policy proposal, but we did get a lot of pushback and there needed to be a lot more outreach. So we'll be bringing our recommendation to you, but the recommendation we provided, we'll be bringing our recommendation to you in December, but the recommendation we provided to the task force was much more of a work program and a location criteria with a half-mile radius from transit villages than it was a full-baked policy proposal. The task force recommendation essentially had one key difference with the staff one, and that is that they recommended exploring opportunity housing citywide for properties with a residential neighborhood land use designation, and that's the land use designation that really is the single-family land use designation in the city. They also recommended that while we do that, we should really double down and prioritize urban village planning work. So I'll quickly go through a comparison. We can come back to this later as desired, comparing SB 9 and opportunity housing. So Martina's gone through how many units could be allowed on SB 9. There's a lot of variation depending on what we do with our code and some interpretations as well. But it could be with our current code up to 10. It could go down to as low as 4 if we amend our code. Opportunity housing was really looking up at a maximum of 4 units on a single family property. So it would allow duplexes, triplexes, and fourplexes, while SB 9 really is looking at duplexes, single family homes, and ADUs. So the geographic boundaries, of course, SB 9 is not just citywide, but statewide. And council direction was, again, to focus it in a more limited area around transit villages. And staff recommendation aligns with council direction. It just provides more a specific radius of where it would apply with a half mile, within a half mile of transit villages. The task force recommendation, again, is to take it citywide, so it's much more similar to the SB 9 provision. Can lots be subdivided? Of course, as Martina went through, yes, they can. And in terms of opportunity housing, that would be TBD. I think our initial thought on opportunity housing, where we were headed, is that we wanted to preserve the existing lotting pattern of single-family neighborhoods. So the thought was, well, not to allow subdivisions and just keep the lotting pattern to keep more of the character of the neighborhood. But that really would be a TBD. So demolition of existing structures, SB 9, is yes. There's of course restrictions if the unit is rented. It's an affordable unit. So opportunity housing, again, that's also would be TBD. A lot of this is TBD, and depending on what council direct us. But in general, the feeling was that there should be some protections so as not to result in displacement. And part of the opportunity housing work, the staff and task force recommendation that they discussed was to do a displacement study to understand how opportunity housing would it actually create displacement and what you could do to mitigate that. So Martina went over this, 1 space per unit for SB9 projects unless you're near transit. Opportunity housing, TBD. We didn't come up with a policy proposal on that. SB9 excludes historic properties. Opportunity housing, as it was being discussed by the task force and the staff, would consider the adapted reuse of designated or eligible historic properties. An example is where Martina lives, is an old Victorian, which was subdivided into a triplex? 7. 7 units, wow. So studios. So, that was kind of something that was being considered as part of opportunity housing. But again, that would be TBD depending on council direction. Both of them were, SB9 is ministerial, opportunity housing was being thought about as ministerial as well. So just kind of the next steps for opportunity housing. So staff will be presenting its recommendation on December 1st to Planning Commission and bringing the item to December 14th for City Council. I want to be clear that our recommendation, it's not on the agenda tonight, but it's going to be developed in the context of SB9 being signed by the governor. I think the other thing you really I want to make you aware of is that the council direction, the council smartly advised us to do a fiscal analysis of opportunity housing. So we had strategic economics prepare an analysis to really understand what would be built, where it would be built, would it be feasible? So they're looking at, is it rental? Is it ownership? Is it duplexes, triplexes, or fourplexes? Would it be built in all of San Jose or just West San Jose or East or South San Jose? So that's the analysis they're going to get. We're going to provide to you, and we'll be developing our recommendation in the context of that as well. I'll turn it back over to Martina.
Okay, so when SB9 becomes the law of the land on January 1st, what do we expect to see? Particularly building off of our experience with accessory dwelling units, we don't expect to see that most eligible properties will use SB9. I can tell you there's a lot of interest. We're getting a lot of questions from the public to our email and our phone line. But again, we're not really expecting to see neighborhoods completely changing, the whole neighborhood by any means. The Turner Center for Housing Innovation at UC Berkeley actually published a study, a feasibility study, an economic analysis of SB9, and they did find that it would have limited impacts. Most parcels throughout the state would not be feasible for constructing new homes under SB9. They found 97% of existing single-family homes would be retained. They found that most parcels are too small to feasibly subdivide. And kind of some geographic specific analysis, they found only about 10% of the single-family zone parcels in our county would be market feasible for new units. And within that, the most financially advantageous model would be converting an existing dwelling into a duplex. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, and a lot of it needs to happen before January 1st. Of course, we need to answer all these questions, these open unanswered questions on how SB9 works and how it intersects with the other state laws that we are subject to. We are not going to have the time to develop a full implementing ordinance before January, so we are going to have to do some interim standards, trying to figure out, okay, we have an existing zoning standard that would preclude an SB9 unit. Well, what does that standard turn into? So we'll be working on that before January 1st. And along those lines, we are going to have to do public information. We're going to have to update forms and processes to start accepting SB9 applications. Things like reprogramming our permitting system, Amanda, for some of the differences as SB9 parcel maps would be an example. We're looking at things like enforcement of that owner occupancy provision. Is there really anything you can do? My initial thought is we would at least keep a list of everyone who's attesting they're going to live in a property for 3 years. And if we have someone attesting they're going to live in the same property, maybe we'll have a conversation. But we'll figure out what we can do beyond that. Yeah, another one is how do we verify whether a property's had a renter within the last 3 years? We don't really keep track of rentals for single-family homes explicitly, so we're going to have to figure out kind of how to work that one out. And then, we're looking at staffing needs to implement SB 9. This isn't something we'd start from scratch. These are generally the same properties, same applicants, same people that are working on ADUs. So we see that kind of just building off of our ADU program instead of creating something new for staffing for SB 9. Couple other things to consider. As I mentioned, that if we want to apply that provision of SB 9, which is the intent of the bill, that cities are not required to permit more than 2 units on a subdivided lot, we would need to bring a zoning ordinance update to council. We think we need to get that to council before SB 9 comes into effect, or else we may have a downzoning issue under SB 330. So that would be something we're going to work on and bring to council, and council can just decide what we want to do with that. The thing with that is we can always go back up later, right? We can do the 2 units now and then have the full conversation and say, actually, we do want to allow more, so we can change it up. But we don't think once it goes into effect, we can really change it going down and reducing the number of units allowed. We're also going to be working on design standards and a complete ordinance to implement SB 9. Again, that will likely be limited by the SB 330 downzoning provisions. It would require extensive outreach. We want to talk to the community. What should these projects look like? One thing that the legislator did is they explicitly exempted any ordinance to implement SB 9 from environmental review. So we would not have to do a CEQA review for that ordinance update. Couple more things to think about. These are things that are going to come up that are considerations about do we want to go above SB 9 in certain areas. One example is in San Jose, many single-family residences are zoned R2 two-family, particularly in our older neighborhoods, particularly around downtown. Do we want to go beyond the minimum of SB 9 and extend it to single-family properties that are zoned R2? We're thinking there's several thousand properties that this could be the case, that they wouldn't be able to use an SB 9 project despite being single-family because of the R2 zoning. Another question is, do we want to allow some types of SB 9-ish projects on historic resources if we can have standards that ensure those resources are not impacted? I think that's a conversation we're going to have in the future. We do estimate that all of this work is going to take at least one full-time planner to complete for some time. And then additional resources beyond that, it's unclear. Again, we're getting a lot of inquiries. Using our experience with ADUs, we'll have a huge onslaught of, can I subdivide my land? It's going to take a lot of time. And it may die down and we'll see fewer applications, but this is all still to be determined. Okay, I'm going to transition to Senate Bill 10. So although these 2 bills are talked about together, they're really not related. And the key thing to know about Senate Bill 10 is that it is voluntary. It is not required. Senate Bill 10 by itself does not change any development standard. It does not allow any additional development, and it does not compel cities to do anything. So cities can just say thank you and move on and never talk about SB 10 again if they wanted to. The best way to explain SB 10 in short is if you've been tracking housing legislation over the last couple years, you'll remember many attempts to require cities to upzone or allow additional units around transit and on infill sites. SB 50 is an example of one of those bills. So those bills did not make it across the finish line. And so this season, the legislator kind of retooled it and said, okay, fine, we're not going to require you to do this upzoning. However, if a city wants to do it, we're going to make it easier for you to do that. And the primary way that they're making it easier is they are exempting from CEQA any general plan update, ordinance update, or other regulation change that would allow up to 10 units per lot on lots that are within transit-rich areas. Generally similar definition as I explained for SB 9, so high-quality bus lines and transit. or urban infill sites, which are sites that are zoned for multifamily or mixed uses and are surrounded by urban development. So again, they're saying if you want to do this, we're going to make it easier for you to do, but cities don't have to do it. A couple things I think is a little interesting about SB 10 in the city. I mean, we're still analyzing that, would it even make sense for us to look at an SB 10 project? One of the things SB 10 requires is that a property you zone per SB 10 would be eligible to use the streamlined ministerial approval process for up to 10 units. However, if the project went above 10 units, they would no longer be eligible for the streamlined ministerial process. And so, knowing that San Jose tends to plan high densities around transit, for example, it's unclear if there's a lot of upzoning to do in a lot of areas that would be covered by SB 10. So that's some analysis we'll be doing. And primarily what we're looking at is, depending on the direction for opportunity housing, it may fall under the umbrella of SB 10. And we may be able to use that CEQA exemption depending on what council ends up directing on that policy work. And with that, in conclusion, there's still a lot of unanswered questions. We are working very hard to get answers to those questions. We meet regularly with planners from all of the other cities in Santa Clara County to kind of compare notes. What did your attorney tell you on this? How are you reading this? What are you doing with this? We'll be working with the State Housing and Community Development Department. We do expect them to release guidance hopefully soon, and we'll be reaching out to them on some of these issues specifically. Given the public interest we've gotten, we have added SB 9 and 10 information on the city's Opportunity Housing website, so please feel free to direct anyone there, just some kind of basic information, links to the memo for this study session, stuff like that, so people can kind of take the time to get a handle on these bills themselves using that website. And then finally, we will be incorporating the new world of SB 9 and 10 into our recommendation for opportunity housing. And that concludes our report.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Martina, Chris, Michael, and everybody on the team who's been working very hard to get a handle on this. I know there's a lot of public interest in this. Let me just say, we typically in public hearings where we're making decisions, that is a typical council meeting, we go to the public first. This is a study session, and for the purpose, we'll certainly be going to the public, but I want to make sure we get questions answered of the council so we have a very clear picture in mind what we're dealing with. So we're going to go to council questions. I'd ask for council questions that focus on clarification. First, we can leave the statements for after public comment. any objections or concerns, whatever, but please, let's focus on clarifying questions so we all have a very clear understanding along with the public of what we're dealing with. So I do not yet have access to Zoom. I've been trying to get the link, so my apologies. I'm going to ask for Tony to help me.
Perales has his hand up.
Great, thank you.
Followed by Foley.
Thank you.
Shall I go, Mayor?
Please. Thank you, Councilmember Perales.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and thank you for the presentation. Certainly something we've all been very interested in as this dialogue has been at the state. And then once SB 9 and 10 were passed, how that compares to opportunity housing is something I've been very interested in, so I appreciate the information. First thing I had was actually that informational memo. I had assumed it would be attached to this agenda item for our public to see, and I had actually directed some individuals from the public to come and look at this agenda item to find that informational memo. My understanding is it's not attached there. I was looking for myself, and then I was looking for it other places where it might be reasonable for the public to find it. It's actually a great informational memo that
It's on our website, though.
puts into place everything that you put on the PowerPoint here, but a little bit more detail. And so I just wanted to see if staff could try as quickly as possible to maybe link it to this agenda item, so then that way the viewers that are here that are watching can go and find that info memo as well. So just wanted to first hear from staff on that, see if that's possible.
Yeah, Councilmember, thank you. I actually have been in touch with Agenda Services staff, and they're working on that right now to get that memo added to the agenda link so people can find that information. It may just take a few minutes to get it up, but you should see it shortly.
Okay, so
If you want to make an
members of the community, please take a look in a few minutes. Hopefully that'll be up soon. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a good info memo, and I know community members that had already seen it and that I'd shared it with were appreciative of that. And I think the PowerPoint, sums it up, but the memo is important as well to share. So question number one would be, when do we expect that strategic economics analysis on opportunity housing to be complete?
The report is more or less complete, so we'll be providing it. We will be putting it in the Planning Commission packet on this item. However, we can talk about posting it on our website sooner than that. That's a possibility, but it's more or less done. We just need to cross a few more T's and dot some I's.
Okay, great. Yeah, looking forward to diving into that analysis as well. I think that'll be very important and helpful. SB 9 talks about excluding historic properties, but also historic districts, correct?
That's correct.
Do we have a list of the districts in San Jose that would be on that exclusion list from SB 9?
Yeah, so ultimately everything is listed on our historic resources inventory, which is posted on our property. So people can actually search it by address to see if their property is listed on it. We also have maps on our historic preservation webpage that shows all of our historic districts and conservation areas.
So if you wanted to look at the whole citywide and get an idea of which districts would be excluded, you could go to that, if you can state that again for the citywide resource.
Yeah, so it would be our historic preservation website. So if you go to sanjoseca.gov/planning, there's on the left nav, there's something called historic resources or historic preservation, something around that. And there we have maps of every single district.
Is there a difference that would distinguish one district from the next? I know there's different levels of sort of historic significance. Is there anything on there that may not be excluded, but it's listed in that resource, or is everything that would be on that map we should expect to be excluded from SB 9?
Yeah, so right now, again, our working assumption is everything would be excluded. Based on the way some other state laws are written, they're written a little bit different, but often it actually cuts it off at a city landmark. So again, right now we're assuming everything, but I'm thinking that there's a potential that it would only be city landmark districts and not our other type of district is called a conservation area. So just for an example, Nagley Park is a conservation area where the Hensley is a city landmark district, and they are listed differently. You'll see them called a conservation area or landmark district. But right now our working assumption is that everything would be excluded.
And when would we have that answer? As you can imagine, there's people that are very interested in whether or not SB 9 would apply to their neighborhoods or not, if they're going to be on that exclusion list or not.
Yeah, as soon as we can. I am signed up for a webinar to go through new state laws, and representatives from HCD will be there next week. So if I can ask the question, I will try to get that answer out of them. But we're working as hard as we can to get it as soon as possible.
Okay, and then what form would we expect to get that answer back? Would it be when maybe the opportunity housing discussion comes to the council, or say if you don't have the answer by then? How do we expect to get some of the updates, say, on SB 9? Should we plan to have an update in January once everything's supposed to be implemented, maybe?
Yeah, that's a good question. Definitely we'll be updating our website as we get more concrete information. So again, right now the webpage just has some basic information, link to the memo, link to the study session, link to the state law. We're working to develop a frequently asked questions, so we would certainly put it on there as soon as we get answers to these questions. So I would say check there, and then yeah, we could certainly, hopefully we'll have the answer by the opportunity housing discussion. We'll do our best to have that answer by then.
I might just add for our city manager and my colleagues' purposes, I think that maybe sometime in January, once we're supposed to be ready to go and implementing SB 9, that we get maybe another update, something that we add to an agenda item on the council agenda to for you to update all of us on everything. Maybe you've already updated online, but just to have that as a discussion. So that's just a suggestion for January. In regards to the opportunity presented on the fact that we have a lot of R2 properties, and I know we have a lot of those in District 3 that wouldn't necessarily be included in SB 9. You made mention what it sounded like we could make some sort of addition or add that into SB 9. Did I hear that wrong? Will we simply just be able to include R2 properties into the allowances of SB 9, or would we? Or were you describing that we'd have to do something like that in opportunity housing, right, in that work we're doing to then add in R2 properties. If you can just clarify that.
No, so SB 9 does not require, wait, sorry, hang on. The Canadian ducks are going home, I guess. Sorry. SB 9 does not require us to allow SB 9 housing on R2 properties. I think the question Martina rose is, you know, there, in some ways, there's more allowance for housing units on R1 single-family properties than there will be on R2 duplex properties. And so that's a question for council to decide. So under the current R2 zoning, you can build a duplex, and of course there's provisions for ADUs on top of that, but you can't subdivide and build 2 duplexes. So that's just a question I think that council will have to consider. We're not required to apply SB 9 to R2 properties. It's just something for the council to think about and provide some direction at some point.
So I guess, yeah, just to make sure understanding correctly how that would be done, that would just be on us, on the council, if we wanted to make an amendment to what would be allowed on an R2 property. Is that correct?
Yeah, it would be using, you know, our local land use authority to update our zoning ordinance to allow things that match SB 9 by ourselves on R2 properties.
Okay, and just to be clear then further, that would then, in certain circumstances, would that trigger CEQA in certain circumstances or no? Because I know that's what SB 9 is allowing here, right? It's a very streamlined process. So how would that apply?
Yeah, so adoption of an ordinance that does that would go beyond SB 9, so we would need CEQA review for that. We could set it up a system, though, that allows those projects to happen ministerially like SB 9, so we could set it up so individual projects didn't require CEQA review. That tends to, you know, put a little bit more CEQA review on the ordinance work when you can't just defer it to the project level, but it could go either way. Just that's something we can control.
Okay. And then lastly, it was mentioned, and this was my interpretation as well as our opportunity housing currently from the suggestions that staff was putting forward and even the suggestions from the GP task force, that it sounded like most of what we were considering under opportunity housing could potentially fit under an umbrella of SB 10 allowance. Is that in a basic understanding? Is that correct?
Sorry. Yes, that is generally correct. I mean, SB 9 doesn't allow triplexes or duplexes, but in terms of the unit count, it's pretty much very similar, if not the same. I'm sorry. What did you ask about SB 10 or SB 9? I'm sorry.
SB 10.
Yeah. Oh, SB 10. I'm sorry. What was your question?
So.
Yeah, so would opportunity housing fit in SB 10? I think that just depends on what council's direction of SB 10 is. And so, you know, the devil's in the details on that, so we would not be able to give you a definitive answer today, even speculatively. We really need to look into that a little bit more, but potentially, we're thinking it potentially could.
Okay, yeah, my understanding of SB 10 is that it's sort of an envelope of, right, or an umbrella of an opportunity, but that if the council, based on, say, all the work we're doing with opportunity housing, if we wanted to move forward with something like what opportunity housing was allowing, we could maybe plug that under the umbrella of SB 10, and that's where it would kind of fit, and that's how we would maybe be implementing SB 10. You're saying maybe on that answer then right now?
Yeah, that answers a maybe, and you know, we would provide more analysis on that as part of the opportunity housing council item.
Yeah, I mean, it depends. If council were to move forward with opportunity housing, it kind of depends on where they would direct staff to apply it, right? Because SB 10 is limited to areas proximate to transit, right? So, yeah, transit infill sites. So it could have applicability, but maybe not everywhere. So yeah, Martin is correct. We'd have to just sort of, it depends on where we're going, and we'd have to look into it.
Okay, great. And I think the question that you answered that I didn't ask was sort of the comparisons of SB 9 and opportunity housing in regards to sort of a lot of the similarities there. So that's I saw that as well, obviously through the memo and the presentation. All right, that's all for my questions at the moment. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. I believe Councilmember Foley was next. Is that right?
Yeah, Foley's next, followed by Mahan.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for the information on SB 9 and 10 and some information on opportunity housing. We've been all getting a lot of questions from our community about all three. And now that SB 9 and 10 are the rule of law, it's nice to get some information on how they might be implemented. So I have a few questions. The first is, Martina, it sounds like we have total flexibility to implement SB 10, but what is the timeline if we decide to do so? Under SB 9, we have to implement it by January 1st. Is that the same timeline for SB 10, or we have flexibility there?
Yeah, we have flexibility. So SB 10 doesn't go into effect until January. So not that we'll have something ready before January. Anyway, we couldn't act on it before January. There is a sunset date on it. I'm looking for the sunset. I want to say it's a few years out. So we would have any time between January and, see if I can find it. January 1st, 2029 to act on SB 10.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that. Regarding, just following up on Councilmember Perales' question regarding exclusion of historic districts. So you have that information off the top of your head. Do you know if that includes the Eichlers?
Yeah, it would, because it is specific to anything listed on the California Register. So that Eichler district, I'm talking specifically about that Eichler district that was placed on the National Register. Anything that's placed on the National Register is automatically put on the California Register, so it does explicitly exclude that district.
Okay, great. And then you also mentioned that SB 9 applies to planned development zoning. Are you talking about like gated communities, that kind of thing? It does apply there?
Yeah, so we have planned development zones everywhere. I would say, just off the top of my head, probably the biggest contiguous chunk of single-family planned development zones are in the Evergreen area. That whole Evergreen specific plan area is a planned development zone. Silver Creek Country Club, planned development zone. Typically, probably, the Meadowlands, those are all planned development zones. So they do typically tend to be kind of out in the hillsides, areas where we develop special development standards for those. Those are single-family zones, so our reading is it would apply. Again, though, the ones I listed, as far as I'm aware, they all have homeowners associations, and I believe those homeowners associations all have covenants and restrictions preventing things like additional subdivisions. Could be wrong there, but we saw this come up actually a lot with accessory dwelling units, that for a long time people in those areas couldn't build those because their homeowners associations prohibited them. And the legislator stepped in and overrode the homeowners associations, but again, not a similar override in planned development zonings.
Okay, so just to follow up on that, and so I understand, if there is a homeowners association, let's talk about the villages. I don't think I have any planned development in D9, but I know the villages is one. They have single family homes, and they also have attached homes, condominiums and townhomes. If further development is restricted by their CC&Rs, then SB 9 doesn't supersede the CC&Rs. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay, that good to know. Thank you. And then you mentioned in one of the slides, and the presentation was really helpful. I appreciate that they must be sold individually. So this development, can you clarify that a little bit for me? I'm kind of confused about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting requirement. I'm not entirely sure why they have it in there. It's not that they must be sold separately. In fact, it doesn't require us to allow them to be sold separately. Of course, individual lots could be with the lot splits, but if you were to say build a duplex, do you have to sell each duplex unit individually? No, absolutely not. You have to design it to meet the standards to where it could be sold individually. So things like separate plumbing, right? You're not going to share a meter for properties that would be conveyed separately. It's stuff like that. You can't have a door between the units. So they have to be built to those standards, but there's no requirement that they actually be sold separately, and there's no requirement the city allow them to be sold separately.
So they'd also have to have their own legal description, separate plat maps in order to sell them.
Correct. Yes, they would actually need a subdivision for condominiums, is what they would require to be able to sell separately.
Okay. Are there, you referred to objective standards or development standards, and you talked specifically, well, you talked about the setback requirements. Are there any maximum height requirements? That's where we're getting a lot of concern, is about height of buildings. So is there in the ordinance or in SB 9, is there any restriction on height?
No, that would,
To the neighborhood?
yeah, that would be something, there's nothing in SB 9 that speaks to height, so that would be a development standard the city would need to evaluate, come up with, and adopt.
So we could impose that restriction if we wanted to.
I will-
Say it's one story, the neighborhood is predominantly single story, and they want the owner of a property wants to subdivide it under SB 9 and build up instead of out. We could restrict how many stories they go.
Potentially. So the one issue with that we are still looking for clarification on is how Senate Bill 330 applies. So there is an argument out there that if you don't already have that height restriction in your zoning ordinance, applying it to SB 9 units, even though they're additional units, is still considered reducing the intensity of development on the lot. That's what Campbell, I think, is trying to do with their ordinance, has I want to say a 16-foot height limit for SB 9 units. And that's where they've received pushback actually from some housing advocates saying that you're not allowed to do that. So this is one of the areas that I will tell you the state will absolutely need to weigh in on, for sure.
Okay.
So it's a maybe at this point.
Any idea when we might get clarification on that? Because I think that's one of the issues that people are concerned about.
Ideally before January 1st. Yeah, I don't. I mean,
Crystal ball. I appreciate the
I don't. There's very soon, as soon as I'm kind of done with this presentation, I will be calling HCD until I can try to get an answer from them. I mean, hopefully they address stuff like that at this webinar next Thursday that they're putting on with the League of Cities. So potentially by next week. But I do know it's a really fundamental question out there. So I am hopeful that the state will expedite coming up with an answer to that.
Okay. So you did bring up the 3-year affidavit, which is the attestation. That's really kind of interesting. So a homeowner could say, I intend to live there, but then they don't live there. And I just imagine a bureaucratic nightmare in us trying to keep track of that, and clearly not the staff to do so. So how are there penalties if they don't live there for 3 years? How do we even enforce that?
It's unclear. Again, the law only requires them to attest that they plan to live there, right? So they can say, I was honestly planning to live there when I filed that attestation. And, I don't think we can do anything about that. And if you think about it, if they say, well, I was planning to live there, but I had to move across the country to take care of my sick mom, I mean, ultimately, would the penalty be unsubdividing the lot and making the person who bought the other lot go away? No, we can't do that. So the reality of that one is I think the enforcement is going to be minimal. And again, it's the only requirement is that they attest they plan to live there.
It's kind of like in the mortgage business, a buyer says they're going to live in the house and they have every intention of living there. So they get a loan that is an owner-occupied loan, which is an interest rate lower than an investment property rate. But then maybe they get in, and maybe after 6 months they have to move out for various circumstances. The lender doesn't necessarily call the loan. It's just an interesting little twist. So I'm kind of curious about that. Is it possible, in District 9, we have a lot of power outages that occur because we have old infrastructure. And I'm wondering, is it possible to require that the developer of these SB 9 units pay to improve infrastructure, or can we require PG&E to improve infrastructure? Can we do anything along those guidelines?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I'm not going to be able to answer it fully. What I can tell you is with the subdivision, backing up, electric infrastructure tends to be off-site infrastructure, right? If you're asking them to build something. With the subdivisions, no, right? We cannot require they do anything off of their property. With the projects themselves, the actual construction of the 2 units, we'd have to look at that and see. I'm not sure on that one.
Okay. I have a few more questions, but I'm going to defer to my colleagues to give them an opportunity to ask any more questions. But before I do, let me make sure I've asked all the real key ones that I needed to make sure that I asked based on the notes I was taking as you were talking about. No, I think that's it. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Councilmember. And again, to all the members of the public, I just appreciate your patience. I'm sorry, I know we will get to public comments. This is a study session, and so the intent of this particular session is to make sure that council can get fully informed. Next up is Councilmember Mahan.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, Councilmember Foley. You got through most of my list, so I appreciate having the opportunity to ask a few more. I'll try to be quick, and thank you for the overview, Martina and Michael and Chris. It's definitely helpful. So I just wanted to confirm, I think you were pretty clear in the presentation, but if the council wants to assure that a lot that currently has a single family home, when SB 9 is implemented, does not result in more than 4 units, we believe we would be able to do that by passing an ordinance to that effect before January 1st. And I further understand that you do plan to bring draft language to the council prior to that date for us to consider. Is that thus far, am I correct?
Yeah, that would be correct.
Okay. And based on my limited past experience with passing ordinances, would that need to be an urgency ordinance to protect us from any risk of violating SB 330, or would just an initial reading be sufficient?
We're thinking urgency ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. And then in addition, so that's great. I'm looking forward to seeing that. In addition to that, what other key questions or decisions are most important for council to weigh in on prior to January 1st? And I guess I'm thinking about development standards. Is it important that we've locked in any of those prior to January 1st, or do we have flexibility?
Yeah, so I mean, we're bound by 2 things: what our zoning ordinance says and what SB 9 says, and so we have to follow both of those as they're written. So beyond that, given the timeline, we're not seeing the ability to have more than just that urgency ordinance on the number of units to council before January, and then we'll have the conversation on the rest after January.
Okay, and that's why I asked, and I just want to make sure that if we do want to consider additional objective development standards, having that conversation after January 1st, I'm understanding that the timing of those decisions is not that critical, or is it? Is it important that we propose those prior to January 1st, or is it acceptable if they're allowable, it doesn't matter when we pass them, essentially?
We don't think we don't think they're critical before January 1st, not as much as that unit question is. So that's more clearly after January 1st. If we do that downzoning, that's very clearly a downzoning. The other ones, we're not thinking it's going to be as much of an issue, or potentially not an issue at all.
Okay, but I do imagine that if we considered objective development standards that include things like building heights, as Councilmember Foley referenced, or maintaining a certain floor to area ratio, if that's allowed, I mean, those could be construed as a downzoning, or do we not think that's the
They could be construed as a downzoning. Now, if you look at the intention of the bill, we do not think that was the intention of the bill. It appears to be wanting cities to adopt their own standards, and it just sets those baselines. So again, that's one where if you ask 2 different people, they have 2 different very strong opinions, and they both feel very confident on that. But we're with the side of, clearly the intent of the law is to allow cities to adopt standards. And if you think about it, no matter what, SB 9 units are additional units, right? So you're not really lowering the intensity. The other kind of factor that could play in here is it's actually lowering the intensity lower than your standards as of 2018. So there's the argument that, well, we didn't have that on the books as of 2018. We didn't allow you to build a duplex in the R1 zone. So by definition, you're increasing the intensity. Again, this is an area that's probably my top, along with the number of unit question area that we're trying to get clarity on as soon as we can.
Right. Sorry, did you just cut out there?
No, I was done.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and I know there are a lot of unknowns, a lot of complexity. I'm trying to wrap my head around it. It does sound like if we wanted to be extra safe in proposing something like height limits or a floor to area ratio, that might be safer to discuss before January 1st. But you're saying we don't think we're precluded from making those decisions later.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement.
Okay, great. And then just on impacts, I kind of wanted to pick up where Councilmember Foley left off. I do worry. I mean, on the one hand, maybe the policy doesn't get much uptake, and then it's kind of a moot point, in which case we haven't really addressed our housing crisis, or the policy does start to address the housing crisis, in which case we may have a lot of problems. And so I guess I'm curious, when we think about impact on utilities and infrastructure from our power grid, water, sewer, roads, I just want to make sure I understand. What I heard you say was that we can't require a developer to do anything off property about increasing density, but we can charge impact fees, or am I mistaken?
Yeah, there's nothing prohibiting us from charging impact fees, and in fact, SB 9 units would be subject to your typical impact fees for either duplex or a single-family dwelling, depending on what they're proposing. So, for example, school impact fees, right? They'd all have to pay the school impact fee as an example, and there's no exception or reduction in SB 9 on any of those impact fees.
Okay.
And Martina, I could just ask, when you're speaking, could you just speak a little more directly into the microphone? It's hard with the masks, I know, but I want to make sure everyone's able to hear. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we can have, it would be subject to the existing impact fees. Okay, let's see here. What else did I have? So my understanding, sort of related to impacts, fiscal impacts, my understanding is that providing services to lower density residential has, at least historically, not been fiscally great for our general fund. So I'm just curious, how do we plan, as SB 9 goes forward and potentially opportunity housing, how do we track the impact of providing services and kind of understand and maybe try to mitigate that impact? I understand it probably happens slowly over time, so maybe it's not a fair question, but I am cognizant that it seems to me, from just a general fund, a fiscal standpoint, it's maybe preferable to get greater density, such as through an urban village plan. So given that this is kind of the opposite of that, how do we understand the fiscal impacts over time?
Yeah, I mean, we would have to hire a consultant to do that sort of analysis. As we obviously need some time for these things to be built, to sort of have the projects to assess what the impacts are, but that's where we really need sort of, have a consultant come in and do the analysis of the service impacts of lower density housing. And we've done that. We've done that before as part of the village. I think it was the last 4-year review update with the task force. But so it's the kind of thing we could do again. Okay.
And if this and potentially other policies like it were to have us going in the wrong direction on something like average vehicle miles traveled, what are the implications, other than obviously the very important one of not meeting our climate smart goals, but are there other state level regulations or laws that we could actually be violating, or could limit us in other ways?
Not that we're aware of. I mean, the state has put housing above all, recognizing the housing crisis, and so I don't think there's a lot we can do. The intention of these bills is to facilitate this stuff, and this bill is nice in that it allows us some flexibility to shape it to our individual community, our individual city, which other bills proposed have not done. So that's good. But yeah, I think there's we're kind of limited here in that regard.
Okay. And then finally, I'll wrap up with this question, at least for now. From just a staffing perspective, what is the impact as we implement SB 9, consider SB 10, consider opportunity housing? I have to imagine this is impacting our ability to execute on an urban village strategy. Can you just describe a little bit what I think I heard it, this might require one additional staff person. Is that truly the limit of the impact here?
Well, so there's really two different parts of this. So there's the actual setting up the process of in the permit center to actually provide information and then process SB 9 applications so they come in and respond to inquiries. So that's another body of work, much like what we're doing with ADUs and our ADU ally. That's a little bit TBD. Then there's the other body of work, which falls on Citywide team and Martina and I, and that body of work is about updating our zoning code. We think the council is going to want to, and we recommend developing our own San Jose specific design standards, which very well could be embedded in the code. But that's going to be a significant body of work. I'm sure there'll be a lot of community interest and outreach needed for that. So I think on that side, we're anticipating that's going to take one full-time planner, at least for probably more than a year, frankly, but at least a year. And then we would need consultant dollars. We're anticipating probably to help us maybe with the outreach or with developing some of the design standards. Yes, so I think that answers your question.
Okay. Sounds like a lot of work. Okay, well, thank you, Michael, and Mayor, that's all I have for now. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Jimenez?
A lot of good questions. I just have one question with regard to historical designations. How do we make certain that whenever those come forward, they're done in good faith as opposed to folks trying to prevent themselves from being included in some of this work? I know it's a doozy of a question, but I would say that a lot of, I think, what we're going to hear, I mean, what we're clearly seeing, and I haven't determined what I'm going to be doing as it relates to this topic, but it seems quite evident to me that folks are trying to figure out ways to squeeze out of this applying to certain areas and such. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are.
That's $1 million question that I think is being grappled with at minimum statewide, right? So I don't know that there is. I don't have a good answer to that. But it is an issue we're aware of, and it's, we're not the only ones. This is something that comes up in the state a lot.
But I mean, if someone is trying to, I think what I hear you saying, council member, is someone's trying to squeeze their neighborhood maybe out of being eligible for SB 9 and establish it as a historic district. I mean, we do have professional standards. There needs to be a professional analysis. So while their objective may not be historic preservation per se, it has to meet the criteria of being, for example, a historic district, and staff would do independent analysis to assess whether it actually would and make a recommendation to council on that.
Okay, then the council would essentially give an up or down vote as to whether we want to agree to that or not, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate all the analysis here, and I know there's more to come. We've had some conversations with legislative staff to better understand their perspective, and it's clear that the intent was to allow up to 4 units in the most extreme case, and we know that's a pretty ambitious design. Clearly, we think we've uncovered something at the very far extreme that could go much higher to 10 units. I understand that if we're going to actually enact the legislative intent, which is to keep the lid on it, 4 units at least, until we can understand what's going on, that's going to require, as you said, Martina, that we would come back before we enact something before the implementation date of SB 9. Is that January 1st?
Yeah, so it would be, the effective date is January 1st, and so that's why we would be looking at an urgency ordinance.
Okay. As much as I think it incredibly improbable that anyone's going to be able to reach for this 10-unit strategy and actually be able to implement it, I would certainly like to get out in front of that. Can you tell us, are we on a path to be able to deliver some kind of modification to the policy?
That is our plan.
Okay, so that would come back to us sometime in December?
Yes, it would likely be December.
Okay, thank you. I think that will at least save some heartburn out there. I guess along the lines of the question that Councilmember Jimenez asked, are we going to see a rush of neighborhoods forming associations and enacting CCRs? Is that something that's even legal? Can you do that after the fact?
That's a good question. I mean, homeowners associations, it's all governed by state law, and I don't know how hard the state makes it to form one, so I think it would be just depending on how hard it is to actually form one. I mean, in general, I think you need all the neighbors to agree, which is easier said than done, to join it and start taxing themselves, form an official association. But I could see people exploring that potentially.
Okay. This whole business about an applicant planning to live on a site for 3 years, I think we all recognize how flimsy that might be. Wasn't there some element of this that would require an applicant to actually live there prior to that time?
So the bill changed on this matter, and so earlier versions of the bill said it had slightly different language, and it said cities may impose an owner occupancy requirement.
Yeah.
And it was actually a last-minute change, I think, to get the bill over the finish line that to me, it seems like a compromise, right? They changed it to a mandatory requirement, but then they softened it. So if you're thinking, wasn't there something that required it or allowed cities to fully require it? Yeah, that would have been an earlier version of the bill, but got softened in at the 11th hour.
Okay. That will be interesting. Yeah, among the list of exclusions was very high fire hazard severity zones. Do we have any of those in San Jose?
Very little. The probably biggest contiguous chunk is Alum Rock Park itself, right?
Yeah.
So non-issue. Some open space above the villages. That's pretty much the extent on the east side. On the west side of San Jose, kind of near the Los Gatos border, there's a most of Los Gatos is actually covered by this. There's a slight area that kind of creeps into San Jose near Blossom Hill. But I haven't actually checked to see what that area is zoned yet. But it is very, very little within the city limits.
Got it. Okay. Good to know all this information, and I appreciate your continued efforts. Let's go to the public now. I just want to check in. We're now at 2:50, and I know we're going to lose quorum. How many folks we got raising our hands at this point, Tony?
I have 150 people who are attending, and the numbers now is climbing. It just went from like 9 to 17.
So why don't we do this, just to make sure everybody can have a chance to speak. Everyone will constrain public comment to 1 minute, so we can hear from everyone before council has to disperse, because we could be here for quite a while.
Okay, and I'm going to start with the in-person. I have Kylie Clark and Johnny Lane. If you guys can come to the microphone. And whoever gets to the microphone first gets to speak first.
Hello, Council and Mayor. My name is Kylie Clark, and I'm the Public Policy Coordinator at West Valley Community Services. I'm here today to share our position regarding SB 9 and affordability. We're really happy to see that you're working to implement Senate Bill 9 and Senate Bill 10, which we hope will create housing opportunities for many of our clients in their communities. As you explore the implications of SB 9, we ask that you also study and implement measures to expand affordability, as without this component, the changes in zoning could fail to help those most in need. Every day, WVCS assists hundreds of households that are struggling to get by as housing prices rise and the cost of living increases, while affordability housing opportunities continue to be elusive and unavailable. As you explore the implications of SB 9, please consider affordability as an integral aspect of implementation. We support SJ Neighborhood for All's call to direct staff to separately study and propose measures to expand affordability, including affordable homeownership and homes for rent. Thank you for all you do.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, Johnny Lane. We own some property in Willow Glen, and we all agree, everyone would agree here, we've tried to read with all of our friends and try to understand SB 9 and SB 10. And we would all agree it's very confusing. There's no one that would not agree with that. And the question is, and I would direct to planning, so they talk about lot splits, but they're talking horizontal. What about vertical? What about, there's nothing in the law that says we can't go up instead of down. So when we're talking about, you take R1s in San Jose, why do we need to go out and take a bigger footprint? Why don't we go up? And there's just, the bill was not well thought out. Everyone would agree with that. Everyone, trust me, there's no one over here, everyone we've talked with in building and planning, everyone's shaking their head. We have some projects that are already in process in San Jose on Direct Creek Road. The question is, could they be split to multi-unit? What could be done? What couldn't be done? How could it be done? Right? I mean, but they're in the process of being demoed, but the law doesn't specify anything. And the only thing this law has managed to do, I get their intention, is cause confusion.
Thank you.
And we're all in support of you. So anything us as in building projects or working with you, with the mayor, that we...
Thank you. Next.
Thank you, sir.
Doug?
City Council members, I'm very happy to be here today. I am Doug Andre. I'm a long-term resident of San Jose. I've never been to a City Council meeting before. And I am very concerned about the implementation of SB 9. I reviewed, the presentation before coming here, and the option of number 3 is 10 units per a single-family lot is rather extreme in my opinion. I really, in conjunction with the opportunity housing, my belief is that the city should concentrate on a reasonable implementation of SB 9 and then deal with opportunity housing when the planning resources are available. And I think I met you, Mr. Liccardo, Mayor Liccardo, during your campaign in West San Jose. Thank you.
Okay, we're moving to Zoom. I currently have 22 hands up. I have Catherine Hedges, followed by Tessa Woodmansey.
Hi, my name is Catherine Hedges. My name is Catherine Hedges. I live downtown, and I hope that we can use all of these changes to zoning to increase the amount of housing in California, in San Jose. It's really important that we address the housing shortage. I know a lot of this new housing won't be super affordable, but even if it's just for workforce people, that's good too. I mean, teachers and firefighters and nurses should be able to live in the city as well. Thank you very much.
Tessa Woodmansey, followed by caller 5140.
Yes, thanks, Tessa Woodmansey. Yes, I'm very supportive of SB 9 and opportunity housing. As we go into our climate crisis, there will be a lot of climate refugees. And my husband, as a biologist and futurist, says that our population could 40x, that's like 40 times, because the science is saying that 1 billion people will be dislocated by 2030, possibly, even, sometimes 2050 you hear. So this type of, impacts into our city, we have to get ahead of, like Mayor Liccardo was saying. And, that is intensifying our housing. And we have to also, I agree with the person who says we have to build taller so that we can use more land locally for food production. So those are our challenges going forward, and that, increasing our housing is very important.
Caller 5140, followed by Ben Leach.
Yeah, I'm really worried about trying to have more housing in my district. Pam said it best. We have a lot of power outages in this district when we have had them for the last 50 years. And since everything's going to go all electric someday, because that's the way it's headed, It's not going to work. You're not going to be able to pack all these people on a lousy electrical grid with no natural gas. Is there a water shortage going on right now? Let me think. I mean, all the rain in the world for the next couple of years isn't going to make it. So to have this vision of all this housing and high density, it wasn't designed that way. The civic design does not work of dense housing in this area. It was meant for urban sprawl, unfortunately, right? That's what happened. So to try to do it in reverse is it's not going to work. And you're going to have, what kind of parking are you going to have?
Ben Leach, followed by Corey Walbach.
Thank you. Ben Leach, I'm the Executive Director of the Preservation Action Council of San Jose. A lot to cover in a minute. Very much appreciate the efforts of the staff to clarify what can be clarified and to acknowledge what is unknown in this. And a lot of those unknowns obviously surround how we are going to treat historic resources in this. And I just want to say that PAC-SJ has not taken a stand one way or the other, mostly because there are too many unknowns. What we are very sure about, though, is that older and historic neighborhoods are already bearing, most of the work of providing affordable housing in the city. So any solution can't come with unintended consequences of incentivizing the demolition of those older and historic houses in historic neighborhoods. So as these issues get worked out, we just are really conscious of not creating more preservation problems in the name of
Hi, before I go to the next speaker, I would just like to remind those of you who have not used Zoom in the past, there is a button that says raise hand. If you click that, it puts you into the queue to speak, and then I'll call your name. I currently have 21 hands up. We have Corey Walbach, followed by Tobin Gilman.
Hi, thank you so much to the city staff and to the council for having this study session. We think it's really helpful. Again, my name is Corey Walbach. I'm here on behalf of Silicon Valley at Home. Silicon Valley at Home is a proud member of the San Jose Neighborhoods for All Coalition, which includes more organizational members than I can list, but please go to our website and take a look at every organization that has signed on. Our organization has been united in supporting the recommendation from the General Plan 4U Review Task Force, and that includes, as we've talked about earlier today, expanding opportunity housing, or at least looking at opportunity housing citywide, emphasizing historic preservation and affordability and anti-displacement. While the conversations got pretty heated in in San Jose, we're glad that SB 9 has actually answered most of the questions. So now what we can do is focus on affordability. Affordability is really the chunk that was left out of SB 9, affordability for ownership and affordability for rentals. Thank you very much.
Tobin Gilman, followed by Marnie Kamzen.
Hi, great presentation, great questions, and I don't envy all of the work that can you hear me? I'm not seeing the.
Yes.
There we go. I don't envy the amount of work staff has to do. I appreciate everything they've done to prepare for today and what they have ahead of them. It's difficult to assess where Senate Bill 9, Senate Bill 10, and opportunity housing, where they overlap, how they're different, where they intersect. But one thing they all have in common is that they all provide ways to convert our inventory of single-family, detached, owner-occupied houses to multifamily attached rental units. And the lack of, the shortage of single-family detached houses is a big reason why young families are leaving our city. So as you go forward with your analysis, just a suggestion to consider how we protect the existing inventory of that particular category of housing, because frankly, we need more of it, not less of it. And that's not to say we don't need multifamily as well, but the dream of a single family house is still there. Thank you.
Marnie Kamzen, followed by Greg Stein.
Yes, thank you for this session, but why even consider SB 10 before we understand the effects of SB 9? City Planning Department is short-staffed already. An example is that on August 25th, I asked a question of a senior permit specialist, and I still have not heard a response. Also, if the council approves SB 10 in any form and other cities don't opt in, and we know that other cities are not going to opt in, then San Jose will become even more of a bedroom community for the rest of Silicon Valley than it already is. We're already short-staffed in city planning. There are shortages in the police department. Services that residents receive will become even more diluted because the tax dollars per resident will be fewer. Optimistically, BART won't be built until 2030. Adding density well before then means more vehicle miles traveled, less parking, cars going around in circles looking for parking spaces. Density makes evacuation more difficult, as a coffee fire shows. There are fires in
Greg Stein, followed by Tammy S. Greg Stein. Okay, I'm going to move on to Tammy S.
Hello, I am a resident of San Jose, and I'm asking you all to please vote no on studying opportunity housing. Vote yes for local control so that we don't have SB 10 in San Jose. And please implement the urban villages for the 2040 general plan to allow housing near transit. The housing department has been overwhelmed by their current projects and should not waste time and resources on studying opportunity housing. There is no sense in ruining the California dream of home ownership by eliminating single-family home zoning. For those of you who have achieved the California dream of home ownership, do you want a 4 to 10-plex house and all of its parking battles on your street? You should treat others as you'd like to be treated when making the laws. Plus, opportunity housing will happen first in the low-price neighborhoods, decreasing their quality of life even more for those who are struggling each day. We don't have the infrastructure such as sewer, water, electricity in the older neighborhoods to accommodate multiple housing units on one lot.
Brenda Doman, followed by Sandra.
Hi, yes, thank you for allowing me to speak. It's an important issue for residents and homeowners of our San Jose community. The elimination of single-family homes, SB 9 and 10, was passed for the benefit of well-funded developers, real estate industry, landlords, at the expense of single-family homeowners as an attack on property rights and quality of life. The state, county, and city continues to allow more housing density when our infrastructure and water resources is already strained due to climate change. It's time for San Jose to start taking care of us who already reside here and stop legislating for extreme growth for special interest groups. Extinguish opportunity housing now. Thank you.
Sandra, followed by Greg Stein.
Hello, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to Council Member. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you for Council Member Dev Davis and Pam Foley for assuring that these issues are finally getting discussed by the City Council. The decisions the City Council will eventually make will impact the decades the city. First, SB 9 is passed. The city needs to prepare for that. My requests are the following: implement SB 9 with a minimum impact on neighborhoods, meaning limit it to 4 units. Do not include R2 zone ratings. 2, stop all studies and work on opportunity housing in SB 10. City staff is behind on urban villages, building permits, reconciliation of zoning maps, SB 9 implementation work, and they have lost staff. We need to prioritize their work. Opportunity housing and SB 10 can be done later. Our neighboring cities are not discussing OH, and they will not be implementing SB 10. Families and Homes is a grassroots organization and coalition that has joined with 29 organizations. Please listen to the citizens.
Greg Stein, followed by Rich Crowley.
Hi, I'm a 34 years resident living, volunteering, and voting in San Jose, not a sociologist, but as you digest these complex bills and carefully weigh the implementation options, please prioritize people versus square footage and profit. What this pandemic has underscored is that quality of life and for mental health reasons, we need more space, privacy, relative quiet, more gardens, more outdoor living. 4 to 10 units packed onto a single family parcel owned by REITs and developers who would be happy to sign any attestations you want to put before them is contrary to what this city has built over the years and what I've enjoyed. So please implement carefully. Thank you.
Rich Crowley, followed by Andrew Toulson.
Good afternoon. My name's Rich Crowley. I know a lot of you on the council. I wanted to, first of all, recognize the planning department. They've been working under a great pressure for a long time. They have a lot of things that they need to get done, and especially things like the urban villages, which were already approved by Envision 2040, with the idea of adding 400,000 new residents by the year 2040. Let's keep our focus in that direction and not send ourselves off a cliff by trying to do too many things at once and not doing it right. We need to do it right. You need to focus in again on what has already been approved and put off our SB 10 and opportunity housing. Thank you.
Andrew Toulson, followed by Aaron Eckhouse.
Hi, thank you for your time and presentation. My name is Andrew Toulson. I'm a resident of Almaden Valley, District 10. I'm concerned that bringing more people to an area that already struggles to keep up with the current population is going to lead to other utility and lower quality of life. Water and electricity are already very large concerns, and bringing more people is going to further stress the infrastructure. I think we need a more nuanced approach that doesn't force densification on people who prefer other types of neighborhoods. Almaden Valley is already feeling pretty alienated. We're feeling alienated from San Jose, and we're currently investigating how we can protect the communities that we've built from these forced changes. We're starting to lose confidence in our government leaders, in their interests, in representing our interests. And again, we're investigating how we could protect our communities. We encourage City Council to consider things like the SMART plan and more nuanced approaches.
Aaron Eckhouse, followed by Kat Wortham.
Hello, thank you. My name is Aaron Eckhouse. I'm the Regional Policy Manager with California YIMBY. We were the sponsors of SB 10, strong supporters of SB 9, and we're also members of the San Jose Neighborhoods for All Coalition. We're really excited to see SB 9 being implemented in San Jose. We think it's a great opportunity to expand housing choices for people in San Jose neighborhoods to address the city's housing crisis. We really want to see you implementing it in a way that supports the bill's success. We join the Neighborhoods for All Coalition in encouraging you to look at incentives or other programs to additionally create affordable housing in all neighborhoods across San Jose. You've taken a first step toward that with your siting policy. And I think there are opportunities as you study this to go beyond that. I'm really excited to see this move forward. I think it's going to be great for San Jose to welcome some more neighbors. Thank you.
Kat Wortham, followed by Doris Lavezzi.
Great. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. So my name is Kat Wortham, and I'm the South Bay and Peninsula Organizer for the Housing Action Coalition. We're a member-supported nonprofit focused on building all types of housing at all income levels. And we're also a member of the San Jose Neighborhoods for All Coalition. At this time, I think it's really important that we look at addressing affordability in San Jose and how we can bring affordability measures into SB 9 implementation. We think this is really critical in enforcing and implementing SB 9. We think the state has done a great job, and we also really want to thank city staff. We know you're working day and night to understand the new bills and then to see their implementation put forward. So thank you for your work, and thanks for the consideration of my comments.
Doris Lavezzi, followed by John Morse.
Good afternoon. I'm Doris Livesey from the Murdoch Neighborhood Association in District 1 for the past 49 years. Since all of you have enough to do to complete all the planned urban villages that have been on the books for how long, and you have to figure out SB 9, please don't waste city staff time on SB 10 without a wide city vote. It's not required. You don't need to do it. Many residents don't want it, and it will cause chaos to parking and also a shrinking tree canopy. Thank you.
John Norse, followed by Barbara Fontana.
I had a bad dream. I couldn't sell my house because of the parking structure next to me. You see, half the 22 neighbors on my block sold their houses to developers for huge profits. And now there was a fourplex on every other lot. Those 44 new families had 88 cars, filling the 68 street parking spaces on my block, plus 20 spaces in the shopping center lot nearby. The shopping center sued the city because the cars from the other blocks in my neighborhood were taking half their lot space. After years of litigation, the city was forced to seize the 2 houses adjoining my parcel for a parking structure designed for my block, plus the block across the street, and the city had to purchase an easement at the rear of the parking structure for residents on the other side of my block. I awoke with a start and thanked heaven that it was only a bad dream. Thank you.
Barbara Fontana, followed by Todd Williams. Barbara Fontana. Okay, I'm going to move on to, go ahead. Sorry, Barbara, we were going to move on, but I just saw you unmuted, so go ahead and unmute again.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I am a resident and voter in San Jose. Our neighborhood tract in San Jose, District 10, has legally recorded long-standing CCNRs on our properties, which we ask be excluded from the proposed opportunity housing. However, in point of fact, we ask for the following. First, retain zoning for single-family homes throughout San Jose and abandon opportunity housing. Second, do not opt into Senate Bill 10, which is too extreme, and do not couple opportunity housing with SB 10 to obscure passage of opportunity housing. Third, any such major changes must be subject to a city-wide vote. Fourth, focus staff on catching up on and prioritizing all the long overdue work on the urban villages plans. Thank you.
Todd Williams, followed by Linda Locke.
Good afternoon. The guise of targeting transit-rich areas is pushing this agenda by singling out a minority of homes to appease the majority. This is a political trick to open the door in a very slippery slope. Also, homeownership is the most people's #1 investment. Any plans to flood the market with housing in an effort to decrease prices and values should be unacceptable. Dave Cortese, Senator Dave Cortese has lost my vote. It's time for more common sense. Thank you.
Linda Locke, followed by Justin Wang.
Hello?
Go ahead.
Okay. My name is Linda Locke, and I've been in my single-family home in Berryessa for 56 years. And as president of the Berryessa Citizens Advisory Council, founded in 1973, and representing residents in District 4, I want you to know that we are actively opposed to the task force proposal to eliminate single-family zoning and the protection of the single-family zone. But now that the state has chosen to possibly usurp local zoning authority with SB 9, we want to deliver 3 messages. I will deliver the first. The council should immediately task the planning department to incorporate design guidelines that protect the neighborhoods to the maximum allowed under SB 9. This should mandate no more than 2 units on any properly formally zoned single-family residential setbacks and on-site parking for at least 1 car per unit.
Justin Wang, followed by Blair Beekman.
Good afternoon, Honorable Mayor and Council members. My name is Justin Wang, Advocacy Manager for Greenbelt Alliance. Greenbelt Alliance has been working for over 60 years to encourage the protection of open space, as well as directing development and growth into our existing communities to promote climate resilience. We are also a proud member of the San Jose Neighborhoods for All Coalition. Today, we're asking you to continue the direction laid out by the San Jose General Plan Task Force by directing staff to study and propose measures to expand affordability, including affordable homeownership and homes for rent. As we've seen heat waves, smoke, floods, droughts, and other climate hazards intensifying in the last few years, it has never been clear that we cannot afford the status quo. The climate equity and ecological value of increasing our infill development cannot be overstated. The science shows that we have an opportunity before us to reduce supercommutes, reduce VMTs, reduce emissions, and increase water and energy efficiency, all of which are critical climate action. Again, by studying and implementing SB 9 and 10, you have the chance to contribute to a safer, more climate smart Bay Area with opportunities for generations to come. Thank you for your time.
Blair Beekman, followed by Susan F.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Thanks for the study session today. I wish I had better knowledge about these things, but it's my understanding, I've tried to describe many times now, the openness and flexibility of mixed income housing ideas that I think can address a wide range of not only different incomes for local housing issues within a housing area, but it can help address all sides of the issue. It can help people address these concerns. I advise everyone to check it out and how housing can, and its incomes of all different levels can be in one neighborhood, and these practices can be done well, and if done as they can be good things for all of us. Please check these things out. Mixed income. Thank you.
Susan F., followed by Carl Fassell.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Fowler, and I'm the treasurer of the Berryessa Citizens Advisory Council, representing the second oldest neighborhood association in San Jose. Since SB 9 is mandatory, we expect the mayor and city council to reallocate city budget priorities to ensure mitigation of the likely community impacts on roads, traffic, utility infrastructure, power, sewer, and water, loss of tree canopy, code enforcement staffing, parks and community center staffing, facilities, and construction oversight. These units will not be planned, but in organic mushrooming distributed randomly across the city. Thank you very much for your time.
Carl, followed by Kiyomi Honda Yamamoto.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm a 40-year resident of San Jose, now living in District 10. I've been following this a little bit. It's my first city council meeting that I've ever listened to. I will try to do that more in the future. I talked to friends and neighbors, and we pretty much all agree that affordable housing is an issue, as everybody talks about, and needs to be addressed. But we also uniformly agree that SB 9 doesn't seem to be the good solution. It looks like that there are many, many issues from infrastructure to quality of life that are going forward, and people are saying, yes, they need to be looked at. But I get the sense, as my first meeting that I've attended, that this stuff is going forward no matter what, and anything inconvenient in the way of rules, regulations, or laws are going to be legislated around, and this is going to be forced on us whether we think it's a good idea or not a good idea. So please think this out and do it right, because SB 9 is not it. Thank you.